Nicholas, your new film, Moonlight, is really unique in its dramatic structure. I mean, it can almost be looked at as three separate little films adding up to a whole. As a composer, how did you unify that musically?
It's a great question. And I think that was something that I thought about from the very beginning. I would say first, when I was trying to figure out early on the sound of the film, after reading the screenplay and after watching some of the early cuts, the first word that really came to me was poetry. Actually, there's this really sense of sublime beauty, tenderness, intimacy, sensitivity in the film, and so I started saying to myself, what is the sound of that? How do you musically create that feeling? And I sent Barry a piece called, actually, that I wrote called "Piano and Violin Poem." I was trying to imagine this, and that's the piece that became what we call Little's theme. And what was interesting was I did have this feeling early on that I wanted something that could recur throughout the chapters, but which would go through its own transformation and evolve. And what was interesting was the next step of the collaboration I had with Barry was that we found, in some ways, almost an aesthetic technique that enabled us to really explore that in depth. And that was when Barry said to me that he really loved this style of music called chopped and screwed music, which is a genre of Southern hip hop where you take tracks and you slow them way down. And when you slow them, the pitch goes down. And so you get this very deepened and enriched, awesome sounding music. It's almost like you can see things more in depth in that sound, and also you get this awesome sort of bass rumble too. And I said to Barry, what if we chopped and screwed the score? What if we did that where I wrote music, recorded music, and then we had a whole second layer of the process where I would experiment with pitching it and bending it and slowing it and chopping it up. And we were both immediately into that. Barry was totally excited about this. So what happened was, over the course of the film, the music does come back, and for example, there's Little's theme in chapter 2. There's a piece called Chiron's theme, which is actually Little's theme but lower and modulated down a little bit. The sonic character is a little different, but then as things continue evolving, for example, you have the schoolyard fight, where that's Chiron's theme, but slowed way down. So it's basically 3 octaves down and then layered on top of itself and run through vinyl. So in some ways, the idea there was that you do have this connective tissue throughout, but there's a real sort of concept there of how we were playing with it. And for example, in the schoolyard scene, it's almost unrecognizable. It's really sort of just rumbling in the subwoofers, but occasionally you can hear what sounds almost like a weird bell or something, and that's actually the piano from Little's and Chiron's theme, but just really, really sort of chopped and screwed.
That's interesting. I mean, it sounds almost as if you're developing the music as the character is developing, and it's matching that.
We were trying to, yeah, and I think one of the fascinating things with film music is with each movie you get to explore a totally unique world, and the fun is working really closely with the director so that you can experiment and find that sort of sound. I really believe that every film has its own sort of unique wavelength, and it's about finding something that sort of resonates with that. So for me, the key was getting Barry to come here to my studio, and we would spend whole days just here trying things out together, exploring things against picture together, and that way I think having that kind of constant close dialogue of what's working, you can feel when things work. And for me, that's the most fun part, where you really have this very, very close collaboration.
Right. You mentioned poetry, and I think that's really interesting because I was going to say this movie really is like a visual and sonic poem.
Yes,
very
that's how I felt.
Yeah, very surreal, very moody, very atmospheric,
Mm-hmm.
very non-traditionally narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So the music goes a long way in underlining those visuals.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's always a fascinating question of what is the right sound for a movie, and the music can change the feelings so much in many ways. So, and I'm always aware of that responsibility in a sense, where you're providing this almost parallel, at times almost parallel character to the film, which is saying certain things. And with this, it just felt early on like poetry, like this real sense of intimacy, and of beauty. I find this movie just incredibly beautiful to watch. I love also the silences. I mean, I think that one of the most important things in scoring a film is also choosing where you don't have music. And I was very aware of certain places where the world was the score in a sense, like just sitting there and watching the characters live and look at each other. I mean, for me, there are these scenes of just overwhelming beauty where you watch Kevin and Black in the third chapter look at each other. Just those they're looking in their eyes, for me, and just the silence of that is so powerful. And for example, there's a whole sequence there where there is no music until right at the very end, just as interestingly, just as we're about to start having the imagery of the boy in front of the ocean. And so I think there's a sense there where the music comes in almost to like usher in a changing world, but letting the characters also just live on their own without having music earlier. So I think it's always an interesting question. There's sort of no right answer. You just have to feel with the movie and experiment. And I'm always fascinated how there are times early on in the process where you can be sort of convinced that there's something that a certain scene is going to have musically, and then after in context watching the whole film, you say, you know what, actually, no, we don't need anything there. So.
Right. You mentioned strings and piano, and
Yes.
listening to the score on its own, those are the most apparent instruments.
Yes.
Especially, and I guess what are two of the major themes of the film. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. The piano, there's piano and strings. The strings are predominantly really focused on, there's a lot of violin, and that's a dear friend of mine and close collaborator, Tim Fain, who I've worked on many, many films with. He's just got just a gorgeous sound. And in particular, for some reason, the strings felt right. There was something about whether it's the sound of the violin or also I'm very attracted to the way that the character of Tim's particular tone as well. And when I first wrote the music for Little's theme, I recorded it and I had Tim play that melody on top with it, because initially I had a piano there, and it just felt right, and what was interesting was then we explored in some ways all the possible textures that strings can have. So for example, there are many different types of string sounds. There's the tremolo strings, which is sort of when the bow is going back and forth very quickly, almost shaking, and you hear that sound at the beginning of the swimming sequence when Juan is about to teach Little to swim. So you hear this sort of it almost sounds like a rustling of the air, but it's strings on a bow. And that sound then actually, to go back almost to what we were talking about with connecting chapters, that sound comes back the next time when you see Chiron walking towards the beach again, when he's going to see Kevin on the beach in chapter 2. So, it's almost, in some ways you get these interesting symbolic connections between the sounds. But so there's some of that. There's also very soaring, almost concerto-like writing for the violin in the swimming sequence, where I really wrote that as like a violin cadenza to a concerto, this sense of just true virtuosity. That's the music that also is featured in the trailer for the movie. It's a piece that I called The Middle of the World. And, so there's really a counterpoint to some of the almost quiet, poetic violin sounds, and then some of these really, soaring, almost like operatic kind of violin textures. And I would also say one other interesting sonic element that I wove into the score was I take actual production sounds at times and blend them into the music. So, for example, when you see Chiron right before he's about to go into the school to kind of fight back, you see him in front of a sink looking into the mirror, and there's this sound of almost like sort of rushing, like, wavy kind of a sound that happens there. And what I did there was, that's actually the sound of the water that Little pours into the bathtub when he's a child. And I chopped and screwed it and sort of just bent it and, incorporated it later there. So in some sense, there's, I love playing with sounds in a way where you're not sure what's reality. And you can then create sometimes musical textures that feel almost strange at times. So, there was some of that. The percussion is another example in that sequence when he's going into the school to fight back. The what sounds almost like a click, like a hi-hat, is actually the sound of Kevin and Chiron high-fiving, where he says, I'll see you around. And, because it felt almost poetic there to say that the sound that he's going to hear in his mind as he's going into that school is the sound of the last high five he had with his friend, before everything kind of changed. So, for me, I always find moments like that where you can do something. If you feel a sort of emotion from that, I usually take that as a sign that I should keep pursuing that direction. So.
Absolutely, yeah, and I have to look for those. I've seen the movie twice now. I'll have to look for that the next time. It's a wonderful movie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, very different also from what you did last year with Big Short, and
yes,
this year you've also had Free State of Jones, another very different score. Yep. Some of the things you worked on early on too, where you did some additional music on 12 Years a Slave, and you were a co-producer on Whiplash, and did some extra music on that. I wonder if you can talk about going from project to project and putting your unique stamp on that.
Sure. And actually, I would say about Whiplash, what's interesting there is I actually, I financed the short film for Whiplash. So I was a producer in the sense that I was really, Justin Hurwitz was the composer of that film, and I was really involved as on the sort of financial and somewhat creative producing element of it in the background. Which was a totally different experience for me as well. It was the first time I'd ever done something like that. And I had always been very fascinated with understanding the filmmaking process and how does a movie actually get made. And a very dear friend of mine is Helen Estabrook, who was a producer of Whiplash, the feature, and the short. And we had conversations about, how do you do this? And one day she sent over a script and said, I think this is amazing. This is writer Damien Chazelle. It's a feature script. We're going to choose a scene and try to make a short film as a proof of concept. And somehow I was crazy enough to say, let's try to do that. So, but it is interesting going from different. I think in a way it's the excitement and the joy of the process that each film is a different set of challenges. Whether on 12 Years a Slave, my role was I was involved with the on-camera music. So I got involved early on at the script stage and worked with Steve McQueen to imagine and reimagine what is the music of pre-Civil War America sound like. What is the music that an African-American violinist plays in New York in 1841? What are the sound of spiritual field songs? What is the type of music that you would hear at a dance in the South in 1848? So we were trying to figure those things out, and so that was its own set of fascinating compositional, but really research-related questions. And then something like The Big Short, where you're right, it's a totally different sphere of thought. Where I remember we spoke last year about Adam McKay asking me, what's the sound of dark math, and trying to say to ourselves, what is the musical sound of dark math? And in some ways, maybe that is like a connecting thread to a lot of these things, which is what is fascinating is trying to imagine the musical analog or musical counterpoint to certain sets of ideas. And I think that is what links a lot of this, which is saying, okay, what's dark math? What's the sound of poetry? What's the music in 1841 New York? These are all questions where there's a research process and there's a real deep thought process, and in some cases it might be a historical answer. In some cases it's a sound conceptual answer, and I think that's what's amazing about getting a chance to work on a variety of projects. Is I think it's always different. It's a new adventure on each film, and so ultimately it comes down to that close relationship with the director, where on my own I might have certain ideas, but I think for me I really take as a guide what is the feeling that the director wants, and how can I bring music to them which will feel like it's inside their film. So that's kind of what I'm hoping and praying for, because it's an alchemy. There's no sort of for me at least, there's no set of sort of scientific principles where I can say, here's what we're going to do here, and here's what, it's a very mysterious process, which is sort of aided by conversation and a lot of close discussion with the director.
Absolutely. Well, Nicholas, congratulations on the film, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.